Hey everyone, welcome to episode 2 of our Oxygen Not Included tutorial series. I'm NetherCloud, and today we're going to be discussing the user interface and how we'll be interacting with the dupes and the world throughout your game. We're here in the world that we created in our previous video, along with our fresh new recruits who look absolutely thrilled to be here. We'll be jumping back and forth between this and some of the other save files that I have, as there are some features that are unavailable until you unlock them, and I want to make sure to give you guys the most complete view of the game and give you the best chances at keeping these little guys alive. We're going to start in the upper left-hand corner with the cycle counter. A cycle is a duplicate day and consists of 600 real-world seconds. You'll see that there's an illuminated section of the planetoid to represent the day, and a little wedge over here that's darker to represent the night. Every 3 cycles, you'll be offered a new option from the printing pod over here. We'll get into that in just a few moments. Next to that, you're going to see 3 over 3. We start with 3 duplicates. If they die or you get more, that number will change. The first number is the number of duplicates here on this planet, and the second number is the number of duplicates throughout your entire galaxy. Next up is the stress meter. This indicates the stress of the duplicates within your colony. The number that's displayed up here at the top is the stress of your most stressed out duplicate, and when a duplicate hits max stress, they will go into that negative reaction that we discussed in the last video. If you mouse over it like we are now, you'll see the stress of the individual duplicates. Moving on, we've got the germ indicator, and this just tells you how many and which duplicates are sick. There are different diseases that your duplicates can get, some of which are very mild and others that can be really detrimental and colony ending. Over here, we've got the available calories, and as the tooltip says, duplicates consume a minimum of 1,000 kcal each per cycle. There are factors that will affect this, including difficulty sliders and duplicate traits, but our baseline is 1,000 calories per cycle, and that gives us some relatively simple math to work with. The Bionic duplicates don't consume calories, they consume joules of power at 120 kilojoules each per cycle. This is in the form of batteries, and we won't go super into detail on that for now. We're going to focus mostly on our standard duplicates and get into the details of the Bionic ones later on. Down on the next line, you'll notice something that may be familiar to those of you that play other colony builders, and that is the speed menu. One of the great things about the game is that you can pause at any time to plan your next move, take a breather, or just curse your dupes for doing something idiotic. It will seem at times like they're actively trying to get themselves killed, so keep an eye on them. There is a slow, medium, and fast speed. It is going to be very tempting to slam the fast forward button and see lots of visual progress happen super quick. But you will oftentimes be sacrificing cycle efficiency when doing that, especially early on when you're learning the game, so I'd advise resisting the temptation and staying to the slower speeds. Next up, we have the toggle red alert button. By default, the highest level of priority you can set without pressing this is a yellow alert. Both will set that task at the highest level of priority, the difference being that with a red alert, they will ignore their schedules and their basic needs, and on a yellow alert, they will not. If you need it done now, no excuses, red alert's the way to go, but I'll tell you, I never use this button. Play as you see fit, but oftentimes the yellow alert will be enough. The final button to interact with on this line is the new blueprint button. I apologize for it not being active. I clicked on it in a previous attempt at this clip, but it's not important because it's a non-essential button. This will give you new aesthetics for your duplicates on a regular basis, so if you want to dress them up in cute outfits and change the look of the different buildings around your base, that will be something you'll want to pay attention to, but if you don't care about aesthetics, you can ignore it completely. There's only a few little bits left up here, including the name of your base, the build of your install, and an area where you'll get notifications about your dupes and your base. Some of these can be completely ignored once you get used to them. Others, such as suffocating dupes, will come with a loud noise associated with them, and you should probably jump on that as it usually means someone's about to die. That'll do it for the upper left-hand corner, so let's move on. Skipping down to the bottom right of the screen, we have tools to issue commands to the duplicates, all of which have a hotkey associated with them, so if you're a hotkey person, just mouse over and you'll see what key does what. We'll start at the left with the dig command. This is how you queue up digs. You just click and drag, and the duplicates will then dig those out. If we unpause, they'll run over and they'll start digging. There are some priority things that we can set later on up here, but let's do one thing at a time. Now let's say you want to cancel those dig commands because you're like, oh no, I don't actually want to dig that. You just Click and drag with your cancel tool, and now those digs are canceled. We also have a deconstruct tool up next, and that will allow you to deconstruct buildings and tiles like that. You can't deconstruct the printing pod, nor should you ever want to. The cancel command also works with the deconstructs, so now you can cancel those deconstructs. Next on the list, we've got the priority button. Now this is going to set the priority of anything. You can change it to individually adjust construction, digging, cleaning, duties, etc., or you could just leave it on all. The priorities range from 1 up to 9, but then also has the top priority. This is the yellow alert we were talking about up on the upper left when we looked at the toggle red alert button. So if you have an emergency and you need it done now, but you don't mind if they take a nap or eat some food in the meantime, you can do that and they will immediately run over and do it. Now, they're not going to run right now because there's nothing to put into the box, so let's just put that priority back down to a 5, which is the standard priority. Before we get into the smaller buttons down here, let's go over to a different save because it'll be a lot more apparent what they do with proper examples. This is the current colony that I'm playing in, and I know it looks like there's a lot going on, but that's because we're all the way up to cycle 232. We'll get here eventually, I do promise. A quick aside before we get into the buttons on the bottom right, which we came here to look at, you'll notice up here you can see some of those notifications that we discussed earlier, and if you go over to the right, you'll see the resource list with the amount of resources available listed in alphabetical order. You can also go into here and choose which ones are displayed. The new ones will always pop up, but you can dismiss them. Now, getting back to what we were talking about, let's start with the disinfect tool. We're going to zoom in on the bathrooms for this one because it's going to show us what we need. When you click on the disinfect tool, it's going to bring up the germ overlay. We'll be going over what overlays are in the next section of the video, so bear with me as there's a lot of crossover in this interface and we can't cover everything all at the same time. This works just like the dig tool. You click and drag, and everything that's got germs on it will be marked to be disinfected. Also, like the dig tool, you can click cancel and cancel the commands. Next up, we've got the sweep tool, and this is one of the reasons we had to come over to the world as well. You'll notice that there's a lot of debris down here. Some of this is seeds, some of it is materials that we dug out. If you want the dupes to bring it to a storage bin, you just go like this. Now, you do have to have a storage bin that has those things assigned to it, and if you don't select sweep only, they'll go around when they have the priority to sweep and bring whatever is listed, but if you have it set to sweep only, the only things they'll bring to that box are the things that you have set to sweep. Let's cancel this real quick and move down to the attack button. This, as you can guess, will tell your duplicants to attack whatever creature is kicking about. We've got a whole bunch of creatures on this tile. We've got some bugs crawling around over here. We've got a hatch ranch and some Drekos. And you just, same thing. Now our dupes will attack that. I don't want those killed, so let's also cancel that. Then we've got the mop tool. Much like the sweep tool, you'll use this to mop things up. There's a small amount of liquid here, so we can tell the dupes, hey, mop up this liquid so nobody slips on it and hurts themselves. They'll also get a debuff from having soggy feet, so cleaning up the liquid's generally a good idea. The next one is the wrangle tool. This is used to tell your rancher duplicants to wrangle a creature. What they'll do is look for a drop-off and bring that creature to the drop-off. Again, there's a lot of stuff here we'll be covering the specifics of later on, like ranching. Going down the line, we have the harvest command, and this sets the auto harvest or disables the auto harvest for the plants on the map. You'll notice that some of them are set to be harvested with green and some are not. So you can just click and drag. That's right, it works with just about everything in the game, clicking and dragging. And if you want to change it to disable, you just toggle that button over there. This does have priorities like everything else, so you can set individual harvesting commands to different priorities. So set that accordingly and you'll be just fine. Next up on the agenda is the empty pipe tool. And as you guessed it, you can use this to empty a pipe. That way, once the pipe has a liquid or a gas in it, or even if a conveyor rail has a solid loaded onto it, you can clear it out of that section. If you do it on the main view like I just did there, anything that's layered there will get cleared. So if you have rails, gas, and liquid pipes on the same tile, it'll queue it up for all of them. So if you want a specific overlay, you click on that overlay and say, hey, I want that blob cleared. Now, the liquid will continue to move, or the solid, or whatever it may be. So this works really well with the disconnect tool as an example. You can go in when it's paused or when it's not paused and snip it. Oftentimes you'll wind up with a single blob of liquid or gas or a piece of solid that you really didn't want there, and you don't know how to get it out. And if it goes to the end of the line, it's gonna cause problems. So you pause, you snip around it, and you tell them to come and plumb that specific point. Now, it won't be flowing while you do that, but you can always grab it, go to the build command, which again, we have to get to still, and just drag through. You don't have to rebuild it. It just is done through the build command. There's a lot of quirky little things, but I think you guys get what we're talking about. Again, we can just cancel it, and that's the basic gist of the commands in the lower right-hand corner. As promised, we're moving on to the overlay section next, the first of which is the oxygen overlay, which is very simple and straightforward. Wherever it's green, they can breathe. Wherever it's red, they're dead. There's a slight caveat to that in that there's also polluted oxygen, which they can still breathe in and will show up as green, but it'll give them a slight debuff called yucky lungs. Not something to be overly concerned about, but you can get rid of that later with an item called the deodorizer. Up next on the list, we've got the power overlay. This is where you're going to see all of your wires that run throughout the base. There are regular wires, conductive wires, heavy watt, and heavy watt conductive wires. I know that's a lot, so when we start doing basic machines, we'll discuss all of that in further detail. Temperature is up next and is an overlay that I recommend becoming very familiar with and checking often. Temperature management is a huge part of Oxygen Not Included, and many a base has been lost to overheating or overcooling, which will stifle crops and may lead to duplicants going hungry and starving. You can also overheat a base so much or crack into something like the magma down here and start scalding your dupes so they actually take damage and perish that way. As you may have guessed, and as is reinforced by the key up here, blue areas on the map are going to represent your cold spots, and red areas are going to represent your hot spots. The buildings will have either a snowflake or a flame to indicate whether they're adding or taking heat away, so that you can balance those accordingly. Currently, we have our overlay set to absolute temperature, which represents the dupe's comfort range using the green colors. You can, however, click on relative temperature and adjust which color is represented by green by moving the slider up and down. This can come in useful for future projects where you need a specific temperature dialed in and you want to see at a glance whether or not you've achieved that. You can always reset the slider to default by pressing this button. I'm not going to cover thermal tolerance and state change here, as they are extremely advanced overlays and aren't really used very often by the average player. So let's move along to the materials overlay, where each element is represented by a different color. There can be a lot going on here to look at when you have the all category selected, so there are subcategories that you can click on. So let's go down those and take a look at a couple. The metal overlay grays out everything that's not metal and will show you ores in the world as well as what material each of the buildings you've placed is made out of. So we've got copper represented by yellow, the light red being copper ore. You can see that we have some copper ore up here to mine. Even the debris will show what it is. We've got iron ore over here, gold amalgam down here. And you can just go down the list if you're looking for a specific building material like sandstone or igneous rock. That's going to be under minerals. If you're looking for filtration medium, which basically comes down to sand or regolith, you can see that here. Consumable ores, organic, cultivatable soil, liquefiable, gas, liquid, and miscellaneous. Likely you're going to spend a decent amount of time looking at the gas, liquid, metal, and mineral overlays, but all of them come in handy in their own regard at some point or another. In direct contrast to the complexity and depth of information available within this overlay, the lighting overlay is going to seem simple by comparison. Where there's light, there's light. Where there's no light, there's no light. Light is important for a couple of reasons, one of which is that duplicants will receive a work speed increase when in a well-lit workspace. This does apply to eating and using the bathroom, which is why we have lights in our toilet and in our Great Hall. In addition to work speed bonuses, you're going to want to pay attention to the amount of light at the top of your map because solar power is a thing, and the more light that's up here, the more power you're going to get per panel. I apologize for the skip forward in time, but I took a small break from recording and that small break turned into a much longer break. So even though it's only been a few moments for you, it's been substantially longer for me. That isn't going to affect our ability to go over things, as it'll just serve to give us more examples with all the extra little contraptions around the map. When last we left off, it was not only almost 400 cycles earlier, but we were going to move into looking at the plumbing overlay since that's the next one up in our list. So let's click that guy and get a look. Now, don't get intimidated by the complexity of this. It's fairly straightforward, but there's a little bit to go over, so let's just zoom in. We're going to press play. Ignore the fact that this pipe is stopped. I cut it off because we've got some power issues in this playthrough, and I wanted to cut down on the number of machines moving so that we can conserve power until we get our petroleum boiler up. Something that's a little bit more advanced, so we're not even going to touch on that. As you can see, the water is flowing through the pipes, and the most important thing to remember on this overlay is that white equals in as far as these intersections go, and green equals out. So wherever you want the water to flow to, you want an input, and wherever you want it to flow from, you want an output. Right now, we're basically looking at my cooling loop. Early game, the best liquid for cooling loops is usually polluted water. There's a lot of it depends when it comes to materials, whether it be liquids or solids in the early game. But for now, we're just going to say that early game cooling loops are generally done with polluted water as they have a lower state change temperature, so they're not going to freeze in the pipes and break things. That is the basics of this. There are a lot of early game contraptions we're going to go over that are very simple but very necessary once we get into that. But since we're just doing overlays right now, let's call it there and move on to the next one. We're trying to keep these brief just to give you guys an overview. Now, much like the plumbing overlay, the next one is our ventilation overlay, and this shows us the gas pipes. Same thing, white equals in, green equals out. We've got some complex overflow things going on here, but if we just move down here, you can see this one is very simple and straightforward. It moves around. When we get into the specifics of piping in our subsequent videos, we can use bridges, both liquid, gas, and the conveyor rails to do some priority stuff. When the gases or liquids are flowing through, they're always going to choose the path of the bridge. So when this gas flows down, it will go over the bridge and down through this pipe, and if this pipe is already jammed up, it will then overflow past the input to the next point. This can lead to some crazy little things, and I'm telling you, even after 1700 hours in this game, I still screw up pipe priorities and conveyor rail priorities. So if you get some weird, wonky movement of your gases and liquids, don't worry about it. It happens to all of us, even the most advanced players. We've got a little bit of an easy one coming up next. This is your Decor. Everything that's green looks super awesome. Dupes are very happy to see beautiful surroundings. Your industrial areas and anywhere you're running large wires like heavy watt or conductive wires is going to have this massive red bit, but they shouldn't see that nearly as often, and depending on what job your duplicate is doing, they may not see bad decor very much at all. You can increase decor with things like statues or backing panels with decorations on it. There's also paintings and a few other things that you can do. There's pedestals, there's hanging plants. Generally, I don't worry about decor early on. It comes down to min-maxing the amount of morale your duplicates have, which is something we're going to look at when we get up to the skills section in a few moments. Basically, you want it to look pretty, but I wouldn't worry about it too much early game. Coming up next, we've got our Germ overlay. We got a small look at this when we were touching on the disinfect tool. Basically, if you look at the map and you see these little speckles, that's germs. Now, one thing to go over is that I don't think I have any on this map, but there are plants that give off floral scents, so they'll show up looking like germs, but they're basically positive germs. Unless your duplicate has allergies, they're going to smell the floral scents and get a little bonus of smelled flowers, which is really good for the duplicates. We've got our next overlay coming up here, which is the farming overlay. You saw this when we were going over the harvest tool. Basically, this just shows you all the plants on your map and the state at which they're growing. So you can just kind of at a glance see what's growing on your map. We have annihilated a large portion of the map, so we don't have a lot of natural plants still growing, but it will show up for your potted plants as well. This is an overlay you're going to spend a decent amount of time in because no matter what you're doing, you're likely to have a substantial number of plants. Up next, our room overlay. This is where it's going to show you what room exists in the game other than these random large areas. Wherever it's gray, it's a miscellaneous room and is usually just something either outside your base or a room that you don't really have a specialty for, like our room over here with our liquid tanks. It's important to note that the room overlays have a list up here of what rooms to make. If you're not sure how to progress in your current playthrough, if you've got your duplicants some air and some water and all the little essentials that they have, and you're like, I don't know what to do next, it's often a good idea to go up to this list and look at the different kinds of rooms you can make. These are usually going to increase your morale or your work speed. One of the first things I do when I start a new playthrough is make this little room here. This is a laboratory and provides a bonus to research speed. I like to research fast because the more things you unlock, the more tools you have to make the base better. These are private bedrooms. You also have a barracks down here. We get morale bonuses for each of these rooms. You also have a ranch over here. This is a stable, and animals in a stable can be tended to. Again, we'll go into stuff like this in detail later on. Basically, you want to make sure that your duplicants have as much morale as possible. So looking through the room list, it'll also tell you up here what that room does. A great hall gives you a morale effect of +6. A kitchen gives you the ability to use the spice grinder. The hospital, sick duplicants assigned to medical buildings located within a hospital are less likely to spread disease. So you can check this out and go through it. It's a really great thing to just get every room you can that's going to give you morale bonuses, and we'll leave it at that for now. Get in the specifics when we start going over gameplay. We've got our exosuit overlay coming up next. Exosuits are very important for the mid to late game because your duplicants are going to go into hazardous areas, and without exosuits, they're going to get burned or suffocate. Right now, all our duplicants are out up on these top 3 floors, but you can see we've got suits hanging in here. This is something you're going to have to research. Chances are by the time you get to suit docks in your first playthrough or two, you're probably going to want to restart anyway. Don't be afraid to start many colonies. You don't have to get married to any individual one, although if you want to, you can. My first colony that I got really into lasted for a very long time and is kind of like a forever home, which is actually what I'm doing with this playthrough. But I digress, often and shamelessly. The automation overlay shows us a little bit of the logic in the game. This is something that can be very intimidating to new players, but it gives you the ability to do complicated logic circuits. This one down here is for our petroleum boiler that was designed by Leopar. This thing is really cool, but kind of complicated. So let's use one of our steam rooms as an example. We've got a thermo sensor here, which basically just says, hey, is it above or below the temperature we have here? Right now we have it set on above. So if it's above 200 degrees in this steam room, it'll send a green signal. That goes over to an OR gate. So it says, hey, if the temperature is above 200 degrees, or if this battery over here is requesting power, which it does at the low threshold, then I want you to turn on the automation, which then kicks on our steam turbines. So when you get into advanced contraptions and all the late game stuff, you're going to want to learn at least a little bit about automation. You can go super crazy with it and almost create a computer inside your game. It's far beyond the scope of this video, but chances are if you get hooked into this game and you go past the early game, you're going to get into automation. So we'll have a whole video dedicated to that later on. The conveyor overlay is where you check out your conveyor rails. Much like the plumbing and gas overlays, this is where you're going to see all of the solids that are on your lines. This works the same as the plumbing and gas overlay, except for solids. So in is white, out is green, and we'll leave it there so that we can move on to our final overlay. This will be the radiation overlay and won't be present unless you have the spaced out DLC installed. You'll see these green areas and they get progressively darker as the radiation gets more intense. Your duplicates can get radiation sick, so keep an eye on that, but it can also be useful because you do need it for research once you get to the 3rd stage of your research tree, and it can kill germs, so don't be too afraid of radiation, but please be mindful. That concludes our delve into the overlay section, so we're going to move right along. On the right side of the screen, you have your planetoid, diagnostic, and resource pull-downs. If you're not playing with the spaced out DLC, this planetoid one won't be here because on the vanilla game, you only have your starting planetoid as your only planetoid. Otherwise, you're going to see them listed down here and be able to click on them to go over to that colony and check out what's going on. This is a way to bounce back and forth. Underneath that, we've got the diagnostic menu, which all of this information is available other places, but important bits are displayed here. I often leave this collapsed unless I have a message about something dire happening, but you might find it useful to have it open. Below that, we've got the resources menu, which we briefly touched on earlier, but just to go over it again, everything is listed in alphabetical order. New items appear with the notification that they are new. You can click on the X's along the side to dismiss things. You can click Clear New if you have multiple items on here and you'd like to clear them off the list. And you can click down here under See All to select which ones are displayed. That's it for the information from the right side of the screen pull-down menus, so let's move along to the tabs at the top, starting with Vitals. When we click on this, we get a quick at-a-glance view of what's going on with our duplicants. There's not a whole heck of a lot here, but we can look at their stress, morale, power, fullness, health, and disease. An important distinction to note is that power is the Bionic duplicant equivalent of fullness. So if you don't have the Bionic DLC, you won't see power here. One of the things that I like to use this menu for is if I'm trying to locate one of the duplicants on screen and I can't quite find them, if you click on them, it'll bring up their information tabs down here, which will allow you to click on the follow cam and zoom in on where they are. Here's our friend Leopar. Let's go over these real quick while we've got them up. This first tab over here shows what errands they're on. This is going to be their current errand, and the ones they want to do next are listed down here in order of importance. This will change as their schedule progresses through, or as you queue up new work with different priorities. Next up, we've got the Config tab under here, which shows you what clothing they're wearing, whether they've got an Atmos suit on, any of the amenities they're assigned to, and that's more or less what's going on here. The Blueprints tab shows you all of the aesthetic blueprints that you've got selected. If you're not into aesthetics, again, you can skip over the aesthetic stuff in the game. It doesn't change any of the gameplay. Over here, we've got a bigger rundown of what's going on. By default, it will be on the Status tab. This is showing you what they're doing, going to fabricate, they're inhaling, exhaling, all of that. This is the condition of the duplicants, which is more details than this has up here under the vitals. So if you want to know a bit about what's going on with them, how full their bladder is, whether they have stamina or calories, all of that's listed here. Down at the bottom, it'll show what they're carrying and their stress levels for the day. In the Bio tab, you're going to see a basic rundown of the duplicant, their name, species, age, etc., as well as their traits and aptitudes. This is all important, but not something you're going to look at a whole heck of a lot. So it's good to know that it's here, but it's only going to be used when you need to check something specific, like if you don't remember what duplicant has what traits. Properties over here is kind of the more nerdy of the tabs. This gives you a rundown of mass, temperature, diseases, specific heat capacity, thermal conductivity. A lot of times what I'm looking for in here is like melting point, but not usually on a duplicant. This properties tab applies to everything that you click on, so if you want to learn something about a specific material or building, this is going to be there for you to get a rundown of what's going on. There's also these buttons down here. When you click on Show Navigation, it'll show you every place that the duplicant can move with these little white lines. It's good to see if you're looking at a duplicant and can't figure out why he's stuck. You'll see that the line breaks somewhere and you'll be like, oh, they can't get there because there's a missing block or something like that. You can also click Move To actually tell them to go somewhere directly. This is one of the few instances where you can actually give direct commands to the duplicant. More or less, you're usually going to be going by priorities and acting as an overview instead of individually micromanaging them, but sometimes you do need to tell them to do specific things. You can also click the follow cam, as we did. If you do and you press play, it'll actually follow them with them centered. And funny enough, there is a bonus for having attention on them for a little bit of time, so if you need a little bit of an extra bit of morale on somebody, give them some personal attention. You can also unequip the suit and the clothing from here, which is sometimes necessary, but not often. Next up in our crosshairs is the Consumables tab. This is where we're going to assign different food types to duplicants so that they don't eat anything we don't want them to eat. You can click on individual check marks for specific duplicants for specific foods, or you can click on the food itself up here to enable or disable an entire column. Usually when you start out, you want to give them access to just about anything so they don't die, but as you progress through, you're going to start to remove raw foods and lower quality foods in favor of foods that give them higher morale boosts. The next tab up is a very important one. It's the Priorities tab. When you click on this, you'll see all of the categories of activities that the dupes can engage with, and you can see at a glance which ones they're good at by the darkness of these individual squares. By default, you'll see that new duplicants come in with everything as a dash. I have mine set to not decorate or research for personal reasons. We'll get into why I do that when we get into gameplay. Given any of these priority tabs as even, the dupes will prioritize the highest priority among the different tasks you have queued up, as we went over with the priorities button down in the lower right. So what we want to do is make sure that the dupes are engaging with the category of activities that best suits them or that we need to be handled most in the colony. This is flat, as we mentioned. If we click it once, it goes up. Again, it goes double up. You can click it around to go all the way to X, and X is basically rolling around the circle back to 0. We've got double down, down, and back to dash. Right click goes the other direction. So with this, you can tell them, hey, you're really good at researching. So if anything happens with research, we want you to do that first. Same thing with building and doctoring for Leopar over here. But what we have to figure out is what priorities they're going to have with specific tasks. Anything that's double upticked is at the same category priority, and then you have to set the individual priorities down with the priorities button down here. So if they have a research task and a doctoring task, they're going to choose one, but since they're both equally important, if you get the priority on one of those tasks higher, then they'll do that first. Let's say we want to make rad pills and we set that at a priority of 6, and our research stations are set at a priority of 5. Even though these categories uptick the same amount, they'll go to the doctoring activity first because the individual task is upticked. That's the basic rundown, and you're going to be changing this as you go through the game and add more dupes. When you start out, people are going to be general workers, and as you progress, you're going to add more specialties, having individual dupes do what's most important to them, and having different categories of tasks assigned to specific ones. With that covered, we're going to move on to yet another important tab, and that is the Schedule tab. By default, when you start, you're going to have a single schedule with all 3 duplicates on it, but you can add as many schedules as you would like and split it up however you see fit. There are a lot of different ways to approach this. I personally go with a 1-hour stagger on my schedule and give them 3 tiles of recreation and 3 tiles of sleep. You'll notice that you can also schedule bath time, but they will use the facilities on their downtime, so it's not absolutely necessary to schedule bath time, and I find that doing it this way gives me what I want. You don't have to give them any type of specific amount, but it is important to note that the longer you give them for downtime, the more of a morale boost they'll have from that. You'll have to take into account long commutes as well, which can become an issue late game, especially on a larger map, because they'll need time to get back to the base in order to take care of their business. Once everybody has taken care of their business, recreated, and slept, they get right back to the workday and go about their daily routine. We'll get more into the details about scheduling and why specific ways of doing things are important or may apply to different situations. We'll get into why you set things up in any particular way and why you would make changes to the schedule as you progress through a playthrough in later videos as we need to go over specifics. Right now, let's move on to the Skills tab. This is where we're going to level up the dupes, and you'll notice that this looks very much like a skill tree in an RPG because that's what it is. This works a little bit different than an RPG though. Each dupe gains a level and you get a skill point like most games, but your skill points do have to be offset by morale. You'll notice that we have a green bar and a red bar here. The green bar is how much morale the dupes have based on number of rooms, quality of food, and several other factors, and the red bar is the number of skills that are applied to them, so you have to keep the red bar below the green bar so you don't create stress. Applying additional points brings up the stress possibilities and makes it more difficult to keep the duplicates happy. When they're not happy, they have mood breaks. You also notice that there are hearts here, and these are the duplicates' interest. They get a bonus when they learn these in the form of less skill points used, but not exactly. It'll still cost you 1 skill point to use this, and it'll still cost you 1 morale, but it will actually give you 1 morale as well. The first tier costs 1, the second tier costs 2, and the third tier costs 3. So you've got to balance this so that your duplicants don't get stressed out and just completely annihilate your colony because they can't handle things. Since you get a bonus from the interest, if you're going up something like the construction tree, this whole tree will cost you 3 morale instead of 6, which is what it would cost if they didn't have an interest in it. That covers the basics, so let's go on to the research tab. This is going to look very similar to research tabs you'll see in just about any game that requires research. You have your low-level researches that you're going to go through with your basic research bench. Once you get up to 2 bars, you're going to need your advanced research bench, which is a supercomputer. When you get to 3 bars, that's where we have to start harvesting radiation for rad bolts. And when we get up to 4 bars, you're going to need to have a rocket ship in space to create data disks. It's a lot of work to get up to this point. As you see, we've barely started to scratch the surface of the data disks in here because I'm taking this playthrough rather slowly and I'm not rushing to get into space. You can get there very quickly, but this is kind of a let's take our time and enjoy ourselves playthrough. So we're focusing on getting our main planet very stable and getting our population and power up so that we just have a little bit of leeway to do fun stuff and we don't have to stress about things as we go. Last up on the tabs over here, we've got our star map, which if you don't have spaced out, this won't exist. It's all hidden right now because, like I said, we haven't gone into space, but as you explore outward with the rockets, you'll uncover different planetoids and points of interest where you can get all sorts of stuff that you wouldn't be able to get on your home planet. You'll be able to establish colonies on different planets and send home resources either via rockets or interplanetary launchers. You'll be able to visit points of interest to harvest meteor fields, and in general, this is just a really fun bit that comes with the Spaced Out DLC. Don't be intimidated. It's a lot of fun. I had a really tough time getting the nerve up to go into space. It was very overwhelming for me at first, as I'm sure it will be for you as well. But again, you can save colonies or start new ones at any time, so there's no need to be afraid of anything. It's just a little space. It's not like not having air has ever hurt anyone before. But let's move along, shall we? We've got our daily reports here. I've very rarely clicked on this. I've clicked through just about everything once or twice to check it out. I'm not even sure everything that's listed here. It's not really something that's necessary, but if you're one of those people that wants to keep track of every little detail and compare numbers between cycle to cycle, week to week, month to month, etc., this is going to be for you. This one over here, up next on our list, is a very fun and important one and something that I feel should be included in most games. This is an in-game codex. You can actually go through here, whether you click on the categories or search in the database, and find everything in the game. Let's look for hatches, one of the little critters that moves around. When you click on the hatch, it shows you all of the things you need to know about them. Their comfort range, livable range, lifespan, how much space they require when they're in a stable, what they drop when they die, their diet. So this one eats sand, turns it into coal, eats sandstone, turns it into coal. That's the basic gist of hatches. They turn things into coal. As you scroll down through all of this ridiculous amount of food that they have the possibility of eating, we'll eventually get to critter morphs. These guys are different variations on the animals, and they might have different diets or different livable ranges and such. There's a lot to go over, and we'll be dedicating an entire episode of this series to ranching, but this works for everything. Any building you want to look up, any material, any information that you're like, man, I wonder what XYZ is, you can go into your codex database here and just do a search. It's as easy as that. Last up on our row up here is our main menu. You guys are familiar with all of these options, so we're not going to go over them, and we're going to instead move down to the very last section of our screen. Down here, we have all of our building options. I've unlocked quite a bit of stuff, so yours is going to start out with very few items. We're not going to go over all of the specifics of this, but this is where everything is that you're going to be building in the game. They're set up in categories, but there is also a search button up here if you want to look for something specific. It's pretty straightforward what categories will have what buildings, but even I forget where some things are sometimes, so that search function is important. I can't believe we've actually covered most of these things in all of these menus, but before we call the episode, we're going to press the H key to recenter on our printing pod and just check out a few of the things going on here. We've got a list of all of the things necessary to complete the Home Sweet Home objective, the Great Escape objective, and the Cosmic Archaeology objective. You can look at this as how to complete the game, but it's just kind of a checklist of some momentous occasions. There will be little cutscenes when you complete them, so if you enjoy completion, this is the spot to keep an eye on what that is. This will also give us the opportunity to click on duplicate skills, which brings us back to this screen, and you can click on the colony site summary, which is a detailed rundown of everything. Oh, looks like we've got a couple of achievements that unlocked. We've got graphs, we've got lists of different buildings, how long colonists have been in there, and there's even a little time lapse over here, which is also available through the main menu, which we went over in the last episode. Finally, what we've got is this area down here where we're going to be able to get new printables. I've got 2.4 cycles until my next printable becomes available. After you choose one, the timer resets to 3 cycles. So every 3 cycles, you're going to get the option to choose a new duplicate or a care package, which could be any number of items in the game. With that, I think we're at the end of the episode. There was a lot to cover. I'm sure I've missed a few things. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments, and I'll do my best to get you all of the most useful information that I can. I do check the comments quite frequently and try to respond to everybody, but give me time because I might have to look up some of the information. This is one of those games where you're constantly learning, and it's what makes it so much fun for me as well as other players. There's just so much to sink your teeth into and chew on for hours upon hours upon hours of gameplay. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I look forward to seeing you guys in the next one. Take care of yourselves out there and be well.